Welcome to the Enterprise Architecture Radio. We are running a series of episodes in which we talk about the pharmaceutical industry. In the previous episode, I gave you an overview of all the various processes and business functions within a pharmaceutical industry, specifically drug development industry. We are not looking at generics. Generic medicine is a much simpler business. We are looking at drug development because it's very interesting and it's fun. Today we are going to deep dive into drug discovery, which is the initial part of the life cycle of a drug's development, and go and see what are the nuances involved in developing a new drug. But before we do that, I'd like to remind you that if you're enjoying the videos that I'm posting, then please let YouTube know, like, share and subscribe, and comment, because I would also like to know how you're liking the videos or not liking the videos. If there is something I can do to improve the videos, then that feedback would be absolutely amazing for me. Also, I would like to talk to you about the story that I told you in the last episode about the doctor and the farmer. If you've not seen that episode, I would strongly recommend that you go back and take a look at that episode and then come back to this one. The link to that episode I'll post in the show notes of this video. But still, I'll give you a quick recap of the story. Long time ago, in a village far away, there was a doctor. And the doctor comes up with a medicine for cancer. And to do that, he does tremendous amount of research and uses radioactive materials like radium, etc. And then decides to sell it for a price. In the same village, there lives a farmer whose wife has cancer, but he doesn't have any money. With great difficulty, he, by talking to the people of the village, getting some donations and a lot of loans, he is able to manage to get half the money that the doctor is asking for. The doctor inquires where he got the money from. He says he got it from donations and loans. He refuses him the medicine. He says, "Get me the entire money or I will not give you the medicine." The farmer pleads and begs and says that my wife is in a lot of misery. Please give me the medicine, but the doctor wouldn't have it. So at night, he's frustrated and tired, and he decides that he'll have to take things into his own hands. And he goes to the doctor's house, beats him up, steals the medicine, brings it back home, and gives the medicine to his wife. That's the end of the story. And I had asked all of you to take sides. Whose side are you on? Are you on the doctor's side or are you on the farmer's side? Whatever the farmer did, was it okay for him to do such a thing? Now, I told you this story because pharmaceutical industry has a little bit of a bad rep. It could be because of the pop culture, TV shows, movies, etc. Erin Brockovich, excellent movie, Julia Roberts, fights against Big Pharma. There is an episode of Boston Legal, I remember, where, I don't remember the characters, but the heroes basically fight against Big Pharma and win. So people sort of believe that pharmaceutical companies profit on the ailments and illness and sickness of the people, right? I have a different view about it. I think that they make money by creating cures of illnesses and sicknesses of people and by giving them a better life. Think about it. The doctor did tremendous amount of research. He used hazardous materials, radioactive materials like radium, to come up with medicine, which means he put his own life into danger while trying to create this medicine. Also, it's not easy to create a new medicine, right? It requires a certain amount of skill. So a farmer would not be able to create a medicine. It requires tremendous amount of research. In fact, in the real world, developing a new drug takes a lot of time. Sometimes it takes years. Some medicines are multi-generational medicines. Like a batch of scientists are doing research on a certain medicine. They spend their entire career doing that and hand it over to the next batch. Next batch of scientists come in, they do research, and then finally. Things have, of course, gotten better with the advancement of technology, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But what I'm trying to say is it's not so easy to come up with new medicine. So if the doctor did come up with a new medicine, is it that wrong for him to expect a price for it? There is also the matter of law and order, right? If people start taking law into their own hands, if they don't have a choice, if they start stealing and robbing and beating people up, it's not good for the society overall. And if the medicines start getting stolen, or if he starts giving out medicines for free or half the cost, then the doctor will not be able to get his return of investments, which would discourage him from doing further research, and research would stop. Now, in this particular case, it is one medicine, and it's unlikely that the doctor would be able to come up with another. But organizations work like that, right? It's the money that funds the research and the world moves forward. So there are many aspects to this story, right, which brings into light what the pharmaceutical industry does. Right? Of course, in this story, I made it very black and white. Either you are on the farmer side or you are on the doctor's side. Either the doctor is right or the farmer is right. But I did it on purpose. I did it because I wanted all of you to think about it from all different angles. But in the real world, it's not so black and white. We have shades of gray, right? And I also understand that compassion matters. Now, we live in a capitalistic world, unfortunately, and there are people who can afford medicines, and then there are people who cannot afford medicines, right? And that's why pharmaceutical organizations have compassionate programs or patient access programs, or different organizations call it different things. But essentially, what they do is they give out these medicines for free to a certain set of people at certain points in time during the drug development process. For example, if the drug is not yet approved but is close to approval, they have done all the tests, they have identified that it's safe for the patients to have, and it is efficacious or effective, and they're waiting for the approval, they're very confident that they will get an approval, then they take patient consent and they give out the medicine for free. Sometimes what happens is they have the approval, but they haven't started manufacturing it yet, right? Because it takes a certain amount of time for the medicine to go from approval to manufacturing. There's a ton of work that needs to be done before you can actually start manufacturing it. There's a ton of documentation. You have to, there is labeling, and there is publishing in the journals, and there is setting up standards of quality control of how the medicine needs to be manufactured, and so on and so forth. Demand forecasting. All these activities are involved in which it takes a little time. So during this period, of course, they have a certain amount of medicine already in place because that's what they were doing research with, right? They were doing clinical trials, and they had already manufactured a certain amount of medicine for the testing that is available to them. So during that period, after the approval and before the manufacturing, pharmaceutical companies usually give out these medicines for free to a certain set of patients. And then there are other patient access programs even after the manufacturing has begun. So what I'm trying to say is, it's not a black and white world, and everything that you see on television is not all true. There are many such programs that pharmaceutical industries run to try to, be compassionate with people, but you also have to understand that unless the pharma companies actually make money out of it and profit out of it, they will not be able to fund the research further. So I hope you enjoyed the story, and now let's get on with the drug development process. So what is drug discovery, or what is a medicine? Pharmaceutical industries at the absolute broken down level, at the lowest level of science, what a medicine really does is it works with a protein, right? We have proteins in our body, and we come up with molecules and compounds that essentially affect the protein to behave in a certain way, right? Sometimes we try to make that cell or that protein live longer. Sometimes we kill it. Like, for example, if it's a cancer cell, then we would create a molecule that would go and attach itself with that protein and kill it, right? That's how we cure cancer. Now, to understand this, how to affect a protein, you need to understand what a protein is. A protein is hemoglobin is a protein, ferritin is a protein, insulin is a protein, right? A protein is like a thread with amino acids on it. So amino acids are like the beads on a thread. So imagine in your head that there is a thread and there are various types of amino acids on it. Now proteins fold, all right? We study protein folding. The reason why we study protein folding is a protein folds and creates a certain gap inside it, right? Now hemoglobin is a protein, for example. What it does is it creates a gap such that the oxygen molecule goes and fits into the protein, and then so it can carry it. It's a carrier, right? Similarly, ferritin is a protein that folds in such a way that it is able to fit iron into it. And insulin is a receptor, right? It's like a neuron, for example, right? It receives messages and passes it on. And insulin also folds in such a way that it is able to receive messages like a radar, right? Radar has to be of a certain shape to be able to receive messages, right? So once we understand how a protein folds, we will be able to create synthetically a compound or find a pre-existing molecule that will fit into the protein, snug fit, right? So we need to study protein folding, but it's not so easy to study protein folding. Various reasons. First, protein has multiple layers of folding, multiple levels of folding. First level of protein folding is the selection of the amino acids that it does. Nature has created all this, right? Over a period of years, over the centuries that we've been on this planet, our bodies have evolved, and we've created a system of how the protein folds, right? So the first level of folding is the selection of the amino acids that will enable a particular protein to fold in such a way that it is able to carry whatever it is meant to carry, right? The selection of amino acids, so that's called the first level of folding. And then this doesn't stand still, obviously. This takes various shapes like spiral shapes, or actually there are two types of shapes that this bead folds into. It's called a helix and a beta pleated sheet. And then so that is the second level of folding. And then we have the third level of folding in which this entire, so for example, the alpha helix structure is like a spiral, right? Now the spiral itself folds into various shapes. That is the third level of folding. And then there is a fourth level of folding where this particular spiral and another protein or another spiral come together and fold within each other, right? And these are all very preordained or predefined shapes. They don't fold into, they don't just get crumpled. It's like origami. You take a piece of paper and you fold it into an airplane. It's very, very systematic. It folds in such a way that it is able to function. It is able to do what it needs to do. So there are 4 levels of folding, but these are really, really small cells, right? These are very small molecules, proteins. They do all this folding and everything, but they're very, very small. Obviously not visible to the naked eye, but also not visible to the compound microscope. So how do you study how it folds, right, if they're so small? So in the past we used to use various techniques to study the protein folding. For example, there's something called X-ray crystallography, right? What we do is we extract all the liquid or all the water from a particular protein. We take a protein, it's like a soluble, and then we isolate one protein and then we extract all the water out of it. There are various ways that you can extract the water. You could mix it with another soluble and wait for it, or you could dry it, or you could put it into a container in which slowly you remove humidity and it gets crystallized. You could freeze it and thaw it, and there are so many ways. But all these ways, and this depends on what kind of protein you are trying to crystallize. Every protein has its own properties and every protein has its own way of getting crystallized. Now, one is this crystallization process is a very time consuming process. You might in your head imagine that it happens like this, but it doesn't. It takes weeks, sometimes months to crystallize a protein. Once the protein has been crystallized, you need to harvest that protein very, very carefully. You have to understand that it's a very small things, and when you harvest it, if you're not very careful, it could break. Anything goes wrong with this entire process and you have to start all over again. All your months of research is gone, right? And then we have cryo electron microscopy. From a process standpoint, this is much simpler because what we do is we flash freeze it. We take a protein and we flash freeze it. And then once we've frozen it, we look at it under the electron microscope, right? Much simpler to understand. But one is, it's not possible for really small proteins. These are only possible with larger proteins. And secondly, the images that you get in the electron microscope are two-dimensional and blurry. They're not very clear. I mean, we've done some recent advancements where things have started getting clear or were starting to get clear, but still two-dimensional, and there's a lot of fuzziness there. It's not very clear. And then we have NMR spectroscopy, where we put the protein into certain specific solutions. Depending upon what the protein is, the solution needs to change and so on. And then we use magnetic waves to study the protein. So all of these were processes that we used to use to study protein folding. And it was a error-prone and complicated and time-consuming process. So all of this is done to do target identification. Target identification means we are identifying a target. We are identifying a protein that we are trying to change behavior of. So, so we are studying that protein, how it folds, and how we would be able to change its behavior. And it used to take a very long time to complete the target identification process, because once you've identified the target, then our next job is to discover a molecule or create a molecule that would fit into this protein, right? So the first phase is called target identification. It used to take about 1 to 2 years for us to truly understand protein folding. Recently, what happened is Google Deepmind came up with a technology called Alphafold. What Alphafold does is you give it the genetic sequencing of a protein, and Alphafold will, based on algorithms, calculate the way that particular protein folds. So you don't need to study it under a microscope anymore, right? It will simulate the folding of that protein based on the genetic sequence. What used to take 1 to 2 years to identify a target now takes 1 to 2 weeks. That's the kind of impact that artificial intelligence has. Now, that's the target identification piece. Once we have identified the target, right, we know how the protein is folding. We know what kind of molecule will go and fit into this protein. And if you are from pharma background and if you are a scientist, then please forgive me. I am absolutely oversimplifying this so that people can understand it. And truth be told, I'm not a scientist myself, so I don't understand half of it. So, I am open to feedback. If you think that I'm doing something wrong, please let me know. Anyway, so in the past, what we used to do is, once we have understood the protein folding, the next set of challenges begin, where we try to identify which molecule will fit into this protein, which essentially means that we would have to do a lot of guesswork. Now, research scientists usually have, considering that they are research scientists, know a certain set of molecules that could actually fit into the shape because they have studied the molecules, etc. But still, there was a tremendous amount of trial and error and guesswork involved. And it used to take 2 to 3 years. So once we have studied the protein molecule 1 to 2 years, we would take 2 to 3 years more to identify the molecule that would fit into this particular protein. In the early 1990s, Richard Brenner and Sidney Lerner proposed that we start tagging the molecules that we are studying, right? And start recording it into a database that this is a particular molecule, for example, then this is its unique identifier, and these are the properties that this molecule has, these are the shapes that it has, and so on and so forth. And they started creating a database of all the molecules that they are studying and started tagging them. Today we have tagged, using computers and artificial intelligence and what have you, billions of molecules, right, with specific barcodes. So we don't really need to do the trial and error and guesswork anymore. We can have a computer system run through this library. It's called the DNA Encoded Library. Look it up. DEL, DNA Encoded Library. So once we have studied how a protein folds and understood its shape, we could run the shape through the DNA Encoded Library, simply put, and find the exact molecule that fits with it. And then, of course, there is testing and looking at how its behavior changes and so on and so forth. So what used to take 2 to 3 years in the past now takes about 6 months to 1 year, right? We've reduced the amount of time that we used to take by 1/3. And on the other hand, we've reduced the protein folding time, which used to take years, into weeks. So that's the impact that artificial intelligence and technology has on business, on pharma, on drug discovery specifically. So like I was saying in my last episode, that if you have started using artificial intelligence to write stories or to do research or to create content or to create images, I said you haven't even touched the surface. The impact that artificial intelligence has on business is like this, and we're just getting started. We've only looked at drug discovery. There are so many other business functions within the pharmaceutical industry that we are going to look at, and look at how artificial intelligence impacts it. It's a beautiful, beautiful field, and the world is an oyster for artificial intelligence. There are things that we can do that we cannot even imagine today. The book that we are going to cover today is called The Lights in the Tunnel by Martin Ford. Now, I read this book because I found it interesting, although I am not entirely sure I agree with what's been told in the book. The book says, essentially the thought is that artificial intelligence and robotics is going to eventually, how do I put it, make it very difficult for the middle class. All right, the middle class, when it talks about, he specifically talks about the middle class from an economic standpoint. I'm not talking about the middle managers or the people who are working in the middle of the organization. No. Martin Ford specifically talks about the middle class. And he says that unless we do something drastic, we as in the government drastically changes the way things are done today, the middle class is going to suffer tremendously. Because over a period of time, more and more things will be done by AI and robotics, which means the middle class is going to lose their jobs, lose unemployment, lose purchasing power, which could also cause havoc to the economy. Now, the book relies heavily on data and on patterns, on how people are losing their jobs and how trends are moving more towards automating and various organizations making various layoffs and all of that, which is a good thing. The data does look solid, but it relies heavily on government action, right? Government needs to do something about it. And it's very dark and bleak and sad, the future that this book shows. So I don't completely want, I don't know whether I agree with it or not, but I don't want to completely agree with him. I don't want to, see, I'm an optimistic person in general. I feel that the world is going to be a beautiful place, and while there will be some trials and tribulations and challenges along the way, but eventually we are going to triumph and live in utopia forever. And that's the kind of world I want to live in, right? So I don't want to agree with him because I don't think that the world is going to be a dark and dingy place for us to live in. So it doesn't feel right. But there is another book that Martin Ford has written called The Rise of the Robots, where he has described all of this in greater nuance. And I will cover the review of that book. I've also read that book, by the way. I'll cover the review of that book in one of the future episodes. So once again, I would like to remind you that Enterprise Architecture Radio is a YouTube channel. And if you enjoy the videos and if you enjoy the podcast, then please let YouTube know and let me know. Like, share, subscribe, and comment if you think that there's something that you'd like to say that that could improve the podcast, or just anything, just talk to me. Once again, Enterprise Architecture Radio is less a podcast and more a collaboration platform. We are pivoting, so I am looking forward to suggestions for a new name for Enterprise Architecture Radio. And the reason I'm looking for this is because I do strongly believe that this podcast does not just belong to me, it belongs to all of us. And I would really like to see you contribute to a new name for Enterprise Architecture Radio. Let's talk. There is the new Discord server that I've set up for Enterprise Architecture Radio. I've seen there are a couple of people who have already started joining, although I've not seen any contributions yet. But then again, I've not made any contributions myself either, except posting the podcast has been released, etc., etc. So, it's a collaboration platform where we are all going to get together and learn from each other and guide each other. And, I'm going to call guests as well. So if you would like to speak on Enterprise Architecture Radio, and if you are a technology or a business leader, then please reach out, and I'd like people to hear your perspectives as well. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. It's a wrap for me. So keep learning, keep guiding, keep teaching each other, but most importantly, have a ton of fun.